text is Ecclesiastes 3:1. These are the words of God. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. Our Father and God, we thank you for this time. We commit it to you. I pray you watch over us, give us clear minds, clean hearts as we examine our lives in the light of your word. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's see. So I want to talk about productivity, and I'll explain that word shortly. I want to have the talk revolve around 3 T's. I want to talk about time. I want to talk about time, and I want to talk about a trick, a hack, and that's the productivity hack. And then I want to talk about technology. Time, a trick, and then technology. Let's start with time. Everybody has the same amount of it. Moving on. The richest man in the world, a billionaire, Bill Gates, has the same amount of time that you do. You have the same amount of time that he does. Everybody has 24 hours in a day. And it's as though God gives you an allotment of something that is incalculably valuable, and he issues it to everyone at the same rate every day. And people don't all have the same amount of smarts or opportunities or money or things like that, but there's one level where there's one area where the playing field is level, and that's when it comes to time. Now, you might say, well, that's I don't think that's relevant, because we may have the same amount of time, but what I have is almost none of it. Right? I'm always behind. I always am playing catch up. What am I supposed to do? Well, remember that the sooner you get behind, the more time there is for catching up. That's the first. That's not the life hack. That's not the hack. You might say, well, I feel like I don't have any time. I'm constantly pressed. Well, think about this for a minute. If you take every week has 168 hours in it. Every week has 168 hours in it. Now subtract a full-time job, 40-hour work week. Now, that 40-hour work week, that definition of a full-time job came from the labor unions. It's not necessarily the way it ought to be. It's not written in the sky, but it's generally considered a full-time job. Subtract 40 hours from 168, you have 128 hours left. Then subtract, let's say you get 8 hours of sleep a night, multiply that by 7 days a week, you've got 56 hours sound asleep every week. That's a full-time job and 16 hours overtime. I mean, well, subtract that and you've got 72 hours left. Now, how is it possible for me to have 72 hours left? That's a lot of time, 72 hours, for watching the game, having meals with your friends, playing Frisbee in the yard, writing the great American novel. 72 hours is a long time. So you say, let's say I just want to have 52 hours left over for fooling around. So I'll just take 20 hours out of it, and that'll be a half-time job. Let's say there's a project, there's a thing, a skill that you want to learn, a book you want to write, or a project you want to complete. And you say, all I have to do, if only someone would hire me at a half-time job to do this thing, well, it's sitting right there, right? Well, you say, I don't know. Okay, the math is right, but I have no idea where those 72 hours go. And that's the issue, right? That's the issue. What you want to do is pay attention to your time. Pay attention to your time, because, as the adage goes, time is money. Time is a resource. Time is something that God gives you that can be used to multiply things in your life exceedingly, and it won't do that if you're just frittering it away. If God gave you $1 million and you drove down the freeway throwing $20 bills out the window, you can't complain at the end of the road trip that you don't have any money. If God gives you 72 extra hours every week, what are you doing with the 72 extra hours? Now, I'm not urging you to be the kind of person who needs to be urged by all his friends to get a life and, come out of your little hidey hole and come to a social event. Realize that 72 hours is a lot of time. You can have a lot of social time. You can have a lot of time hanging out with your friends. You can have a lot of time to do both extra work and to have a life. Now, let's talk a little bit about that extra work. The problem is, if you view your work, the 40 hours that we already subtracted out, your job, the way you keep food on the table, and this extra work that I'm urging you to, let's say, extra 20 hours, when you tally all that up and you look at it, it's going to be a problem for you if you despise your work, if you don't have a biblical view of work. But God created us put our first parents in the garden, and work was assigned to the human race before the fall. So work is not a consequence of the fall. Work is not downstream from sin. Work was assigned to us. We were put into this work. Adam was put into the world to tend the garden and to keep it. He had a task. And he and his wife had a task together to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. So they had a task, they had a job, and they had a task and a job and hard work to do in paradise. So they were in paradise, and they had walls to build and roads to develop and ships to build and mines to dig. In the first chapters of Genesis, we're told what minerals, what precious stones are in the mountains in this place, and this place, and this place. And that's anticipating my third point, the technology, the issue of tools. Realize that time is really important, and your tracking of time is really important. You want to become like the Sioux and use every part of the buffalo. Right? Use everything, and that doesn't mean that you're a driven maniac, because again, you budget 10 hours a week for feasting, right? 62 hours left. There's plenty of time. There's plenty of time to think up excuses as to why you didn't get it done. All right, so time is important. Time is important. Here is the trick. Here is the central hook that I developed my book Productivity around, and that is you can accomplish an awful lot if you chip away at it a little bit at a time. Okay, if you say to yourself, I'll just use writing the great American novel as the task, but the task could be painting a picture, composing a symphony, building a house. It could be any number of things. Let's say you've got this mentality. You say, I've got this idea for a novel, and I can see myself writing it. If only I could have 6 months sabbatical and nothing else to do, and a clean desk, and all my pencils sharpened, and my computer not acting up. If I had all these things, and everything was just so and tidy, and everybody left me alone for 6 months, then I could do it. Okay? Have you noticed in the beginning, in the front of many, many books, the author, it's customary to say certain things like thanks to so-and-so and so-and-so for reviewing the manuscript, and any mistakes that remain are my own. Yeah, that's a little thing that all the authors have to say. There's another thing that everybody has to say, and that is, many thanks to my long-suffering family, to my beloved 3 children and my wife, who would tap on the door of my study quietly twice, leave a sandwich by the door, and tiptoe away. And they had to put up with this for many months, and thank you to my long-suffering family. Well, here's the problem. Here's the problem with that. That's not how life comes at you. You don't get 6 months free and clear. You don't get an opportunity to just clear the decks and have nothing else to do apart from this thing that you really care about doing. The thing that you care about doing, the care that you have for the thing that you care about doing is going to be measured by whether or not you do it when circumstances are conspiring against you. When circumstances are conspiring against you, do you carve out time to do this thing anyway? All right, now, here's how the hack works. Here's how the trick works. Say you want to write a book. Say you want to write a novel. Say you want to write a short story. We'll just sit down. You can say something like, I won't go to bed until I add 100 words to my project. 100 words. Now that's about 10 minutes of typing, okay? 10 minutes or less. 10 minutes of typing, 100 words. So you sit down, open up the file, and you look at the bottom and it says there 586 words. So you get to go to bed when it's 686 words. So you type until you have 100, and don't worry about it if it's 120, if you got on, just type, and then you close the file, you go to bed. Then tomorrow night, sometime in the evening after supper, you just say, I want to make sure that I chip away at this thing, and I'll add another 100 words tonight. Now, your 100 words in 10 minutes is not a screaming impossibility. Right? It's just simply not. So you type for 10 minutes, and then you close the file, go to bed, come back. Now, after 10 days, you've got 1,000 words. After a month, you've got 3,000 words. Okay, after 2 months, you've got 6,000 words, 9,000 words. A modest-sized book is 50,000 words. Now, it's conceivable that you could, at the end of this period of time, at the end of a year, astonish your family. Instead of thanking your long-suffering family for being patient with you while you howled in your study, you could present them all with a book that nobody knew you were writing. It's descriptions of you all at the dinner table. No, you wouldn't do that. Chip away. Early on, this particular method occurred to me one time when I was talking to the editor of a magazine back east, Books and Culture. It's now defunct. But the editor asked if I would like to review a new book that had just come out about Napoleon. And as it happened in my education, in my reading, the Napoleonic Era was this hazy gray smudge in my thinking. What happened there exactly? I knew who Napoleon was, but I wasn't, generally, but it was pretty smudgy. And I thought, I thought for years that I really needed to fill in the gaps on Napoleon because that was just an embarrassment. You don't want to get to the last day of judgment and have the archangel asking you questions about the Napoleonic Wars. I should have read it. Fortunately, your salvation does not depend on anything like that. But he asked me if I would like to review for their publication a book on Napoleon. And I thought, okay, 2 birds with 1 stone. Remember, use every part of the buffalo. Okay, here's something he's asking me to do. I can write, I can be paid, and I can fill in a gap that I've been wanting to fill in. So I said, sure. So they sent me a review copy of this new hot biography of Napoleon that had just come out. And it arrived in the mail, and it was this brick of a book. It was this huge book. I thought, I didn't want to know that much about Napoleon. But it was this great big doorstopper of a book, 700 pages, 700 or 800 pages, something like that. And I looked at that and I said, okay. And I tracked down the calendar, looked at the deadline. When do they want this review? I backed off a week for writing, right? So I backed off a week. That's the deadline. I want to finish the book by that date. And then I looked at what date it was, and I said, how many days do I have? How many days do I have till I want to start writing? And then I do a simple division problem. How many pages? How many days? This is how many pages I have to read a day. And so I read that many pages a day, more or less. I just chipped away at it. But I got something valuable. I wrote the book review, but I also learned, hey, this works, right? This works. One of the things I have on my, I've got 4 categories of books. I'm reading a bunch of different books all at the same time, but there's 4 that I always want to have in the circulation, 4 categories, and they are the book that I'm reading, the book that I'm pursuing, the book that I'm chasing, a book of poetry. I always want to be reading a book of poetry. I always want to be reading a novel, a book of fiction, and I always want to read what I call a bucket book. A bucket book is a book that I really should have read by this time in my life, but mysteriously have not. So after this great experience with Napoleon, I thought something like, I could do Moby Dick this way, because that was a bucket book. I had never read Moby Dick, and I'd heard stories from my children and grandchildren, all of whom I made read Moby Dick, because I'm on the board, and you got to read Moby Dick, and so all these tales and stories. And so I got the book, and how many pages, and 10 pages a day, or whatever. And I didn't have a deadline there, but 5 pages a day or 10 pages a day is just a few minutes. Right? It's just a few minutes. It's not that big a deal. And then you find yourself, all of a sudden, you look at your page pointer and you're halfway through. And you say, oh, how did that happen? Well, it happened because you chipped away. You just take a little bite, take a little step, and it's going to get you there. And remember that you have 72 hours to fool around with this stuff in. 72 hours a week. All right, last point, technology. Technology, if you were to look up technology or digital devices or software programs in your software program, your Bible search program, you wouldn't find any reference to technology. The Bible doesn't talk about technology as such. There are a few references to rudimentary technologies, including musical instruments in Genesis, but it doesn't tell us how to think about the internet, or how to think about your laptop, or how to think about your iPhone. The Bible doesn't give you any information on what to do with technology. And that's because I think we study the Bible using the wrong word to search for, the wrong word to examine. Technology is a form of wealth. Technology is a form of wealth. It is not this new thing that came into the world and nobody knows what to do and the Bible doesn't talk about it. The technology is a way of, well, I'll put it this way. I grew up in a standard American suburban home, sort of 50s. I was born in 1953, born in that era of Eisenhower's America. My father grew up in the Great Depression, and my father was one of 6 boys on a Nebraska farm. One of 6 boys on a Nebraska farm. All of the boys took one bath once a week in the kitchen in the same water, right? Rotating through. That was the level standard of living. 6 boys, one at a time in the kitchen, heat up the water, and they went through it. Then I grew up in what, looking back now, were very modest circumstances, but they were fine and nice at the time. And now, I'll just, all right. There's a guitar tuner. In case I run across a guitar that's out of tune. Now, I've got all these servants here. That's because that's what these people are. I've got access on this thing to virtually every library in the world. I can find out what the Anglo-Saxon word for this noun is. I can look things up in Latin. I can send a note to somebody in New Zealand and have them answer me with this. Now, if you were to take something like this and ask someone like Jonathan Edwards or George Washington, what would it take to find out what the Anglo-Saxon word for this, right now? What would it take? Well, I'd have to have a special servant trained in Anglo-Saxon sitting over there. And then if I wanted someone to get a letter to New Zealand and back in 30 seconds, I would need a genie in a bottle. But you could have thousands of these things, servants. And servants are a form of wealth, right? Now, that means the Bible doesn't have any specific warnings about technology, but the Bible has many warnings about wealth, a lot of warnings about wealth. Wealth is not a sinful thing in itself, but wealth is a very valuable servant and a terrible master. Right? So God doesn't mind his people having money. He does mind money having his people. And that's an easy thing to say and a hard thing to remember, especially when you have money, especially when you don't think you have money. All right? So you're a poor college student, and you don't think that you have thousands of servants. But you have thousands of servants. And what you want to do is learn how to manage those servants. And that means chip away. That's back to step 2. Chip away at it. Read manuals, a couple pages a day. Right? You say, here's a new app. I want to read the manual on this app and find out what it can do. I got an iPhone. I want to get a manual on iPhone and find out what it can do. I want to just chip away. And if you're doing this sort of thing at multiple hours a week, you will be astonished at how quickly your productivity stacks up, how quickly your productivity is multiplied. There are many other things I could say, but I want to leave time for questions.
So I was hoping, could you give us some Bible verses to support your plotting? Or is this plotting thing just, Doug 3:16?
No. I would say basically it's the book of Proverbs. So what do you, and in Ecclesiastes 3:1, where it says there's a season for everything and a time for everything. There's a time for war, time for peace, time for plowing, time for harvest, and all the things that are described there are, there's not, it's not that this is a sin, but it's not a lot, time is not allotted in Ecclesiastes 3 for ultimate frisbee. Now, that's okay, but you have to fit it, all the things that are mentioned.
For war. Right?
Yeah, you could go to war over that. So basically, I would say the wisdom literature is where I would find this kind of thing centered. You walk by a sluggard's house, and you see all the things he should have done, and he can't do it because I don't have time. I don't have time. Yeah. Well, you do. Just pull one weed at a time. Pull one weed.
Yeah. Right. So when we read the scriptures and they're living in this largely agricultural society, and a lot of the proverbs have to deal with, as you said, sowing and harvest time, there would have been a different rhythm to their life where it'd be really busy, all hands on deck, it's harvest time, and then there would be certain kinds of lulls. It would be different than some of our maybe modern 9 to 5.
9 to 5, 24/7. Right.
So how would you? So I'm guessing you would say there's a time to plod, but there's also a time to sprint. So for a lot of students who are, they do the cram thing, sometimes that's because they haven't been plodding.
Right.
But is there a time, or do you sprint sometimes?
Oh, yeah. So sometimes you'll say the ox is in the ditch. I got to work extra because of everything piled up. But you want to make sure that they didn't pile up because of your own negligence. They piled up because forces beyond your control. You were working on this project all term, and then your apartment burned down and you broke your leg and all the things you wish you could tell your professor. It was out of your control. So there are times when, even in urban life or small town life that's not agrarian, if you live on a farm, God has built in a rhythm for you. But even in an urban setting, God requires the Sabbath of us. He says, it's interesting that the day is fixed in the sky. The month is fixed in the sky. It's a lunar phenomenon. The year is fixed in the sky. It's how long it takes us to get around the sun. But the week is not connected to anything astronomical. It's just the Word of God. And not just the Word of God, but it's the Word of God, which means that even if you are working for a corporation or you're writing code or you're doing things like that, you should, in obedience to the Word, find yourself in the same basic rhythm that an agrarian farmer would have.
So there should be plowing and harvest, feasting, and time.
Feasting, and you come into the Sabbath, and everybody.
Open it up for questions. Yeah, Judah.
So I've heard that you have some habits for plotting through things with audio. Did you explain some of what you do with that and how much?
Did you say with audio?
Yeah, like audio books or.
Okay. So the audio books I go through, I listen to books, I read books on Kindle, and I read I have different settings. The Audible is virtually all in my truck. So I listen to books in 3-minute increments because that's how long it takes to get anywhere in Moscow. You get in the truck and you drive down to Main Street, and there's 2 minutes of whatever the book was, and then you've got 2 more minutes on the way to lunch. But it's astonishing. I can get through an average book in a week or so that way. So that's how I do my Audible listening. Sometimes I will, a special kind of book would be the kind of book where, I've done this with C.S. Lewis, where I'll listen to Lewis on Audible, but I also have the hard copy. And I sometimes keep the hard copy in the truck. And if I listen to something that's striking, I hear something at a stoplight or when I get there, I'll find it and highlight it and anchor it that way. So that's Audible. Kindle is morning and evening reading, and the hard copy is usually at the office during the day sometime.
Have you done any sort of plotting through learning a language, and if so, what did you do? Like if you went to learn a language, how did you do it?
Yeah. All my language learning stories are sad.
That's encouraging.
I took a year of French in high school, and I learned how to say "ici, madame" when she called the roll. That was it. A couple of years of Spanish, and then I took 2 years of Greek at the university here when I was just out of the Navy, and this was all before I learned these principles. I was learning these languages the way they were thrown at me, and then I took a couple of years of Latin. After that, on similar, and Latin is where it started to become more reasonable, and I was probably, see, I can't imagine anything more difficult than learning Chinese, but 2-year-old Chinese people do it. they're just, and, a billion of them did it. And so we wait until you're 20 or something, when your brain, all the concrete in your brain is hardened, and then, okay, memorize this. And so a lot of the languages I learned were later on, and so you put scare quotes around learn. And then I took a year of Anglo-Saxon here, and that was probably I was probably the most aware of what I'm talking about tonight with that acquisition, but even there, not totally. So that's why I'm not fluent in anything except English, and I struggle with that.
You ain't bad. I had a question about the languages thing. I can't remember what it was now. Any other? Yeah, Bennett.
What advice do you have for calling an audible in your schedule, and like when to do it and how to do it?
Like calling an audible, not audible like over here, but calling it like a change up.
Yeah.
Right. So I'll tell them, let's say I want to get, let's say I go home so I can have some time to work on some things. I'll tell Chris Lamaro, the church secretary, don't call me unless the bone's sticking out. If the bone's sticking out, then it's an emergency. We change everything. We change everything. But generally, what you want to do is avoid the tyranny of the urgent. There is a certain justice to the tyranny of the genuine emergency, but some people live. There's always an emergency. It's always a crisis. And so one of the fundamental disciplines of time management is learning to say no to 80% of the emergencies, and then being willing to abandon everything and call the audible when it really is on fire.
So how detailed do you get with this? Do you like lay out your day, like say 8 to 9 I'm gonna do this every day, and then or like something like that, or is it more just at some point in the day I want to get this?
No, I joke, but it's not really a joke. The joke is I go where I'm pointed. So I'll come down to the office and open up my calendar and look at it to see what's happening today. And I've given, so when I talk with Chris Lamaro, who runs my calendar, we talk at the big picture. I say I like to keep Wednesdays open. Wednesday is my sermon prep day. So that's when I prepare the sermon outline. So she keeps that generally clear. And then we say, okay, here's counseling appointments. This is what we want to do with meetings. If I do podcast interviews, they'll go here. So we get a general rough picture, and then she fills it in. And I just find out what I'm doing today.
So do you have anything helpful to say for people who don't have that secretary? Chris Lamaro is really good.
Yes, she is. She is good. I'm sure you can find an app that'll do it for you.
It seems like a lot of some of this plotting stuff, even with the languages thing, you have learned how you learn over time, and it's become, I'm guessing you're far more productive now than you were when you were first.
Yes, yes, and the way I learn, and that's a very good point, because different people have different learning styles, and mine is a total tonnage thing. I just shovel as much in as I can and hope that something sticks, and some of it does. So, good news. Sometimes there have been times where I've in my office and my eye falls on a book on my shelf, and I think, oh, that looks fascinating. That looks interesting. So I pull it down, and and there's blue highlighter all the way through it. I read this. And I thought, oh, a fascinating new book. So Tolkien was once asked how he did the things he did, and he said, my ideas grow up out of the leaf mold of my mind. So my philosophy is not to read this fact and then memorize that fact and then move on to the next fact. That's not what I do. I just try to read the book and get as many leaves on the forest floor as I can, and then read the next book and let the leaves fall, and then hope that the leaves compost and something useful grows. That's how my brain works. I've got a crock pot brain, and I just throw a carrot in, and eventually it might might taste good.
So with this total tonnage approach, that takes years for the crock pot to brew, and so you are constantly adding to it now. For students who are often looking at, I have a test in 7 weeks, or I need to have this paper done, there's only so much total tonnage that can go into that. So how, if you were a freshman again, without knowing what you know now, but knowing how you learn, what would you maybe do differently?
Okay, if I were here in your position, instead of the position I was in when I went through college, the way a liberal arts education is structured is it takes advantage of this principle that I'm talking about. Because, I didn't get to this. What you want to do is read canonically. Right? You read canonically, because there's a book in the canon is worth 100 books that you might have picked up at a yard sale that was a Book of the Month Club selection 20 years ago. So if I go through a rigorous liberal arts education, what's happening is your crockpot brain is being filled up with all sorts of better ingredients, and you'll be astonished at the fruitfulness of it. I'm not in charge of that. So what I had to do is I sort of felt my way in the dark, trying to figure out. I basically had to figure out where to find an education. I started with C.S. Lewis and went different avenues. And if you rely on the Western tradition, what you do is you get a head start. You get the initial. It's like being set up in business, and someone says, "And here's $50,000 to start your business with." That's what a good education, which is I did not have. A good education is going to provide you with that. And then you can start adding your own ingredients in the crock pot of your brain after you graduate.
Yeah. Do you still feel like you're playing catch up?
I absolutely am, yes. And
so I'm guessing when you start reading, you're like, wow, I'm done. And then you look at, if you look at the amount of books you can read in a lifetime, if God gives you, let's say God gives you 80 years, and you realize, okay, I would still only be scratching the surface.
If you read 2 books a week, you won't crack 10,000 books. Yeah. And 2 books a week is pretty good clip, right? Yeah. So if you think, that's why you want to read pivotal hinge books, key books, instead of just random selections.
Other questions? Ryan.
You mentioned building a house where that was one thing you said you could plod through this.
Yeah.
But that's actually what you've done at one point. Did you do a lot of plodding for that? Was that actually a lot more concentrated time?
No, Nate and I built the house, and it took 5 years. So we bought a little house when the kids were little. I spent 6 years fixing it up, fixer-upper type of thing. And then we sold it, made a little bit of money, bought some acreage, and then bought some used lumber, and so we had the land free and clear, and Nate was just moving into 8th grade, so we decided, well, let's have the shop class that neither of us ever had. And so I got a book on how to build a house. And God was very kind. But I went up there and staked it out and asked people. This is all pre-YouTube, and so we just chipped away. So we framed it in, poured the concrete, framed it in, and then we'd run out of money and we'd quit for a while. And then when we had money and good weather, we'd buy some more materials, and so we built it that way, and it took 5 years.
How universal, so you made the qualification that you learn a certain way and you're learning to figure that out. How universal do you think some of this way that you're describing is? Is this something that everyone should be doing, or should people be trying to figure out if something else works for them?
No, I think the universal part, the universal part is everybody's got that 72 hours. Okay? Now, my brain is such that I can be reading 20 different books at a time and just a few pages here, and so that's how my brain works. Somebody else might say I can manage 2 books at a time, and that's
They read them faster.
and so they would read serially, and I read more laterally. That's a style of learning thing. But what's not a style of learning is burning daylight through that 72 hours watching cat videos.
Yeah. So 2 things that I've noticed as talking to students and figuring this out myself is, so the urgent versus important thing helps you prioritize what needs to get done. In your case, your schedule's kind of maxed out, so you're just going. But how much do you step back and do some goal setting, like, all right, I want to get really good at cooking, or I want to master or become amateur at this skill. Do you ever kind of like do the end of the year thing, see what I want to, how did I do this year, and what can I do to improve or do differently?
Yeah, Nancy and I have done that frequently, where our anniversary is New Year's Eve, and it took us a few years to figure out why the restaurants were always so crowded. What's going on?
Champagne for everyone.
So we frequently have, near the beginning of the year, gone out for dinner. What do you want to do this next year? What goals do you have? She'll ask me, and I'll ask her. And yes. So I think but that's the level. I'm not a day planner kind of person. I don't have it scheduled down to the minute. What I do is, if I've got a minute, if I get 15 minutes, let's say I've finished a task, and I look at my calendar and I've got a counseling appointment in 25 minutes. Well, I'll just open up something on my computer and work on for 25 minutes on what that is. So I don't plan that beforehand. I just try to use every minute that makes itself available.
Yeah. All right, any last questions before we wrap up? Yeah, in the back.
Yeah, so I heard this quote once that went something like, whenever rest feels like sin, you know that work might be your God. So
Yeah.
how do you apply productivity to those people who might have workaholic tendencies or who feel very sinful about resting instead of constantly?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So one of the keys is, do you find it difficult to honor the Sabbath? I think God has put into His 10 Commandments, and notice that it's one of the 10 Commandments. It's there with the adultery and murder, and He wants us to keep a day holy, and it's a day of rest. So, and I take rest there not as measured by a physics textbook or how work defined by a physics textbook, but rather work defined by how you make your living 6 days a week. If you can't let it go and put your feet up and just worship the Lord and go home and take a nap. If you can't do that, if you're driven inside or you're fretting, that's a great idol identifier, right? So and the Sabbath is not the only place we do that, but it sets the pace for doing that. So I believe that a person ought to work hard and go home and be able to relax. Resting is a biblical concept, but constant entertainment is not the same thing, right? So if you put your feet up and watch a movie and you're resting, I think that's what you ought to be doing. But if you need constant entertainment because you're chasing shiny objects, that's a problem. Or if you're always at work and can't be bothered with, wasting time watching people recite poetry or watching. If you can't be bothered with that, then your idol is mammon or work, and the idol might be luxury or self-indulgence or laziness on the other end. And if you're biblical, it's a built-in pattern of work and rest. So you ought to measure, are my evenings it's not that your evenings are the Sabbath, but are your evenings like a Sabbath? When you go to sleep, is your sleep sweet? Do you sleep restfully because you're tired? And do you wake up refreshed? And do you want to go to work because work is a joy, not because you've got this compulsion? So, yes. Amen to all of it.
Yeah, looking forward to Monday, but also looking forward to Sunday.
Right.
And loving both of those.
Right.
All right, well, let's thank Pastor Doug for coming tonight.
Thank you.